Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Sharing Wisdom. I am your host, Angie Wisdom, and today we're speaking with Brian Bogert. He is going to share some amazing insight on what he calls the taking out the trash strategy. So many times, I'm sure you can relate, people get kind of stuck. They spin their wheels, certain triggers set them in a place where they're just not moving forward anymore. And there's a great deal of burnout, exhaustion, and it trickles down through all areas of your life and business. Well, Brian's going to share his insights and help us really tap into recognizing those triggers, being able to take out the trash so that we can live a fuller life and have more success that we want to achieve. So, Brian, thanks for joining us.
Angie, it's a pleasure to be here. And I told you to just freestyle an intro and you freestyled a beautiful one. So thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to be here and unpack some stuff with you today.
Love it. Love it. Well, I'm glad you're here because I have so many listeners and clients that often deal with some of the things that I've heard you speak about in terms of, kind of the burnout and putting effort in the wrong places and that manifesting into kind of emotions and feelings that are causing probably destruction might be a strong word, but some destruction in relationships and business alone. So kind of start us off a little bit with what you know from the clients that you work with and what you see in people.
Yeah, and I know that there's going to be elements of my story that will integrate throughout this conversation that will give some relevance to where and how I've kind of moved to the place that I am today. But when I work with high performers, that's typically in the one-to-one work. What I do is work with typically people who've reached levels of success, particularly external definitions of success, reached levels of financial security, freedom, but they wake up one day and realize how heavy they still feel, how they still are just hoping to take a breath, how disconnected, isolated, and alone they feel. And, what's fascinating is, for the most part, I'm going to go as far to say over 95% of my clients that are high performers exist with some level of shame in their world that shows up in a way that creates resistance and false intellectual and emotional narratives. And so many high performers in particular, myself included, learned early in life, whether it was through parents or the world, to receive love, validation, and connection through performance. And so there becomes a really difficult process of having to dig inside and really understand those pieces of trash from their past that really are showing up as their fatal flaw and their biggest problems that continue to repeat in business, relationships, life, and health. Yeah. I had many moments in my life where I didn't even realize I was carrying trash, yet I felt like garbage consistently. And I know we'll unpack this a little further as we go through here, but in the work that I do, it's just unbelievable the amount of toxic shame that exists in culture today in so many different elements of it. And I'm not even talking about a specific framework. I don't care if we're talking religion or moms or politics or business and success or hustle culture. Like, I don't care what it is. There's this element of toxic shame that exists in so much of the messaging that is consistently telling people that who they are and what they want isn't good enough.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that creates damage and destruction because it comes out as defense and armor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so well said. And it's so true. I mean, I think we work with similar clientele in the sense that, they can check the boxes of many different things, right? Whether it's their income, whether it's their material possessions, the house, the wife, the kids, but there's just this like lack of fulfillment, and it can be so conflicting because you want to be grateful. You feel like, well, I have everything. What is wrong with me? Like, how can I not be in this amazing space if I've gotten all these things that I worked so hard for? So I think it's so relatable to so many people. And the default is to go, okay, well, what should I accomplish next? What's the next thing on my list? What's the next finish line? What's the next goal? Because maybe I just haven't gone far enough. And this next thing is going to bring me all this joy and, pleasure in my life.
Yeah.
I have a feeling you see the same thing.
It's interesting hearing you talk about that because yes, it is absolutely the case. And here's the reality, like the world doesn't teach us to chase who, they teach us to chase what. What house, what car, what amount of money, what amount of success, right? And so through the process of doing that in such an external fixed element, we almost lose who we are in the process. In fact, I know for a fact that that's what happened in my path, right?
Mm,
And when we wake up one day and we realize that our unconscious minds conditioned us to believe that if we had money, success, prestige, built a life of prominence, then maybe people would want to be around us, look up to us, admire
mm-hmm.
us, right? But the reality of it
Yeah.
is I know firsthand, I woke up at 27 making plenty of money. Our business was $10 million at that time. And
Mm-hmm.
I was running in circles with people making multiple 6 figures, 7 figures, and 8 figures, and realized that I had all the what's the world ever wanted. But it
Right,
cost me who I
right.
was, like at the deepest level. And I realized the isolation, the disconnection, and all of us were feeling the same way, which started
Mm-hmm.
to tell me, like, oh man, what does this look like? But that's the truth. The world teaches us to believe that you're stuck because you have the wrong strategy and tactics in your world. If I
Right,
just
right.
learn the next best sales system, if I get the next piece of
Yes.
technology, if I bring in the next person, if I make and break finally my $5 million of revenue, if I, whatever the next thing is, like you just said, right, then I'm going to be okay.
Yeah. That I
I'm here to
just
tell you
must
that
not have hit
that
it.
is never what makes you okay. And it's also never the thing that keeps you stuck,
Yeah.
right?
So true. It
Ever. But it's
is.
what we
Yeah.
believe. Strategy and tactics are essential for leveraging and scaling our lives and our businesses, but it is always the trash from your past, which is tied to the emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning that is showing up and keeping you stuck. It's those moments that cause you to react in moments when really you want to respond, when your body goes into fight or
Mm-hmm.
flight in trigger mode because your wife looked at you incorrectly about how you loaded the dishwasher, but it has nothing to do with her. It has everything to do with how your grandpa looked at you when you were 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is
Yeah.
never the outside. It's always the inside to create the connection and the freedom and the joy.
Yeah. So, I mean, in simple terms, and I mean, you've given a great amount of detail of what that is, but it goes back to the inner work. It goes back to time with yourself and creating that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I say all the time, like people use themselves as just like a machine, they just expect so much and they do. But when do you ever turn inward and explore the things that you're talking about? And what I think is challenging, and you tell me, but it's hard, right? The inner work is so much more hard,
Yeah.
more rewarding, hard than that next best strategy, than the next best sales
Yeah.
book. Would you agree?
Oh, it's significantly harder. And the world also doesn't teach us how to feel. In fact, it
Mm-hmm.
tells us not to. Right. And
Yeah.
in so many cases, because there's not a healthy model for even knowing what that looks like, people again default to what the model that exists, which is the
Mm-hmm.
one so many of us follow. And so absolutely this is true. And it's again about learning how to actually move ourselves to a place that we can see ourselves clearly and sit. But to give some perspective, look, when I was 7 years old, I was run over by a truck and my left arm was completely severed from my body, reattached,
Wow.
24 surgeries, years of recovery and surgery. And here's what the world told me. Well, if you've got a strong mindset, if you're mentally tough, then you're going to be able to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But here's what also happened. I walked out of the hospital, had a teddy bear in between my arm, and inevitably everyone would ask, what happened to you? Expecting me to be like, oh, I was racing my brother down the street with our bikes and I crashed, or I flew off the jungle gym. And I'd look at
Yeah.
him deadpan in the eye and say, I was run over by a truck and my arm was torn off. Now I got really used to seeing jaws hit the ground,
I
and immediately they'd
bet.
pause.
Oh
And
my
they'd turn to my
gosh.
parents for validation, which told me what? They didn't believe my truth.
Right, right.
Every single time I told this story when I was 7, 8, 9, or 10 years old, every single time they would look to a parent or an adult for validation, which just further reinforced that my truth wasn't going to be accepted. And then the other thing they would do is they would view me through their lens of what they thought I'd be capable of in their situation, or the other way around, what they'd
Mm-hmm.
be capable of in my situation.
Sure, sure.
And I was not going to be defined by that. So the mental toughness I created was Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself.
Mm-hmm.
And it served me really well for a long time. And I did a lot of things. And I learned how to push through. Mindset is important. But then I woke up at 20, snowboarding, rebroke my left arm, almost lost it again, went 10 months with it hanging by my side and 7 surgeons who
Mm.
were afraid to touch me. And here's what I realized in that time. I had so many people in my life at that time. I had friends, I had brotherhood brothers, we were good. Like life was soaring.
Mm-hmm.
No one was there. No one.
Really?
Now, I want to be really clear. I don't have any ill feelings, nothing towards anybody, because here was the reality. They bought into the power of my narrative. Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And what they
Mm-hmm.
didn't realize is that I didn't have the courage in one of my more vulnerable periods as an adult to actually ask for help.
Yeah.
Right? And so what did that do for me? Oh, wow, I'm really disconnected. My mental toughness is here. And it led down this path of human connection because I believed, oh, that's what's going to get me there. So vulnerability and authenticity, that are the glue that binds human connection, man, that's going to be my path. But I got really, really good at getting other people to let their walls down so that I could go in and help them, but I still wasn't doing it for myself.
What
And
was
then I woke up
holding
at
you
32,
back?
and this is a really important part that I want to close this part with because it's going to be really critical for people to understand this. Here's the reality. 32 years old, I wake up, my daughter is 2 years old. We just got done playing, I'm laughing. She puts her arm around my neck, gives me a kiss on the cheek, and she goes, I love you, Dad. And I broke down in tears. I'm not one that cries typically, but I think that men crying is a complete sign of strength.
Yeah.
But it was complete joy in that moment. Like overwhelming joy, and I'd never experienced emotion in my memory to that level before. And so I was fortunate to pause long enough and pay attention to the fact that it was like, wow, if I've never felt this intensity before, then every other emotion I've felt is also pale in comparison, which means I'm not feeling. And what I started to realize is that when I shut off physical pain because it exceeded my ability to cope, when I started to put up the armor because I believe I needed to hide from what the world believed from me, I also shut off emotional pain, mental pain, and spiritual pain for 20 to 25 years, and I didn't realize it.
Wow.
I did because I couldn't be, because I didn't and wasn't going to allow my nervous system to calm down and actually heal. But what I started to realize is human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. And so the reality of it is everything I'd been doing up until that point was still fabricated. So just like the intellectual and mental narratives, everybody's like, oh, just choose to be grateful, right? If it becomes an intellectual shift alone, it doesn't transform. If it's not embodied, it isn't actually experiencing the transformation and growth. There's 40,000 brain-like cells in the heart called sensory neurites that have cellular memory. And it's been proven that if you just intellectually process the patterns of your past and your traumas alone up here, that you don't actually feel, heal, and transform. Until it's felt and embodied at the emotional level and the physiological level in the body, which so many of us avoid like the plague, we cannot heal. So if we do not feel, we cannot heal. And so this is why it gets so confusing. We've all these internal, emotional, and intellectual narratives that are telling us conflicting things, while the world is also telling us how we need to show up, while we're believing that we're not good enough in the box that the world's creating for us.
That's a lot, Brian. That is a lot. And, you know, I know the people are listening right now and going, wait, something in there is catching me. I have an experience similar to that. Oh my gosh, I have pain from this, or I don't feel, or I've never cried. So everyone's grabbing onto something here. So bring us to a place where we can start to understand the first thing that pops to my mind is awareness. Awareness is screaming at me right now because you have to be a person who's self-aware in order to catch any of that. There are people who go through their whole lives without even realizing that they're not feeling, without even realizing so much of the kind of awareness that you've had. So I know that self-awareness has to be in there in the beginning, but what else? I mean, in the beginning, how does somebody even kind of catch this and go, gosh, I've got to do something different?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would throw out there, and you can play along if you want to answer this question directly on the show and we can take it, or people can just resonate with this and then I'll give the framing. Either one I'm okay with. But I like to ask a question because the very first thing, and it is around awareness, and I'll expand on awareness just really quickly and then give you the pillars that support it. Most awareness is done incorrectly. And so we need to be really cautious with even what that looks like. But the first question most people say is like, how do I know if I've got trash from my past? I mean, I could tell you that every single one of you has it.
Everybody.
And you could accept it and believe it. Or I could ask you a question that will allow you to feel it. Who was the last person that made you feel like garbage?
Who was the last person that made me feel like
If you felt anything in response to that question, you have trash from your past. So here's the really important thing. Most people look at this and they say, well, trash from my past. Well, that must be childhood trauma. It must be this. It could literally be the difference in your sibling getting slight preference in one area of attention, of interest with a parent that you felt neglected and therefore needed to outperform in another direction to compensate and gather their attention, love, and validation. Like, it doesn't even have to be trauma. It's these moments that we don't feel seen and understood and connected at the deepest level. And so if it's okay, what I'd like to do is to talk about the framing of the human experience that causes us to disconnect before I give you the pillars in trash, because I think it's really important to understand this. And this is a part of awareness.
Yeah. And I want you to share that. I want people to also understand that you said something so important, that like, it doesn't have to be extreme trauma. I think people tend to go, oh, well, that was just little thing. That's nothing compared to what she had or what he had. And they
Minimizing our own story.
minimalize, yes,
Yeah.
your own story. And we think that just like that's not a big deal. That's in the past. It was this small little thing. And maybe it's not this huge thing, like you said, trauma, but it created something. It left you with something that is now affecting something else in your life.
Correct.
So I think it's important for people to kind of zone in on that. Like, don't sit there and say, oh, no, that's not me. I don't have anything big like that, because it is sometimes those little micro things that make the difference.
It often is, in fact, and it's those little micro things that have the greatest impact in so many cases. And every one of those situations in your past created both an intellectual and an emotional narrative around your experience, which formed a belief, and patterns in your life get created to further validate that belief.
Sure.
And so
100%.
if we understand this, and we will go through this, and thank you for pausing that. Again, it's the human experience. Let's just pay attention to this. We all want four things. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel protected. We all want to feel seen and understood, and we all want to feel connected. We want these two the most, but they don't happen unless being safe and protected happen first. So when we walk into an environment and we don't feel safe, or to use the exact example with a sibling and a slight preference, I could care deeply about basketball, and so could my sibling. They just happen to be better at it and have a deeper relationship with my father. I'm making this up. This isn't mine.
Sure.
But the reality of it is like, oh, I now see that you're putting preferential treatment connection in that moment, which doesn't make me feel seen and understood or connected in this time when I'm even with you guys in this moment. So I don't feel safe, which means I also don't feel protected, right? It could happen in a social environment, a networking room, your own family, where you just don't feel like you're going to be able to be seen and understood. This happens all the time. And the second that we don't feel safe, we protect ourselves. So Angie, are you familiar with those 35-gallon black trash bags that are like outdoor trash bags?
I am.
Okay. I want you to imagine one unfolded right now. And I want you to imagine holding it in front of your face.
Okay.
Okay?
Got it.
Now, I want you to tell me, how could you expect anyone on the other side to see who you are, what you want, your heart, your desires, your mind, your intent, all of what your life is, and the way that you are going to help them in that moment because of your true intent? How can you expect anybody to receive that delivered through an invisible force field of protection?
Impossible.
And then you're assuming that they're not carrying their own, that's going to further distort the message. So the second that you protect yourself, you actually guarantee that you won't be seen and understood or connected. But what happens? Our reaction is to protect ourselves, because the world told us to avoid, eliminate, or avoid pain at all costs, right?
Yep. And
so we have to realize, though, that the second you protect yourself, you're actually disconnecting yourself from not only yourself, but who and what you want on the other side of it. So people say, well, what does that mean? Well, there's two ways to lower our armor. We can fabricate it by convincing ourselves in a moment that we're safe, that allows us to lower our armor and be exposed. Or we can unpack the stuff that we're still protecting that's causing us to carry the armor in the first place and start to heal through it, so that over time, we don't even have reactions in moments that used to trigger us. There's both paths. But to be a protector and connector, it requires you to lower your own, so you can wrap a layer of protection around the environment you're in to make sure that everyone is safe, everyone's protected, everyone's seen, understood, and everyone's connected. Here's the thing, too. Trash does two other things. If you imagine two bags now holding out front, full of debris, how long could you hold those?
Well, I'm pretty strong, but
a couple minutes?
Too long. Yeah.
And what's going to happen the longer you carry it and hold it?
Yeah, it's going to get heavier. You're going to get more exhausted. You're going to get burnout. Absolutely.
Just like the trash from your past.
Absolutely. And I so get that. To take me back to this, because I think this is important too. You said in that moment where people don't feel safe, they don't feel secure, they protect themselves. So that is so key. Talk about awareness right there. Like, how does that show up for people? I think people protect themselves
Yeah.
and they don't even know they're protecting themselves. And
Yeah, I'll
then
give you
they're
a
in
great
this place
example.
of like, why is nobody connecting with me? Why am I not,
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
are. So what does that look like for people sometimes?
I'll give you a great example that used to happen with my wife and I all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
My wife would come in, and I want to be clear, like being a husband and father is the only thing binary in my world. I've said forever that I do everything for the benefit of my family. But what's also very true is they didn't feel emotionally safe with me until the last couple of years. I
Okay.
provided everything else for them, physical safety, love, leadership, all these pieces, right? But
Mm-hmm.
being a good husband and father has always been something that's important to me, and I dealt with shame and anger. So she would ask me a simple question like this, like, hey, honey, what are we going to do with the kids this weekend?
Mm-hmm.
And my shame filter would cause me to hear it this way. Hey, honey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father here recently, so what are you going to do to make up for it this weekend?
Mm-hmm.
And immediately, all of a sudden in that moment, I'm like, well, fuck that. Like, I'm a great husband. I'm a great father. I show up, I get all elevated, I get defensive, and I react in that
Mm-hmm.
moment, and I rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last 4 days to show her I'm a good husband and father. That
Mm-hmm.
wasn't even what she asked.
Yeah.
Right? And she delivered it with a neutral, calm energy, but because I had armor or it triggered something that I was protecting inside, I reacted, and now what did I do? I created damage that also caused her to put her armor up, guaranteeing that
Mm-hmm.
it's going to require more energy to move ourselves through it. The
Sure.
awareness piece that's important for everybody is that I want to make sure that this is not just becoming more aware of all the ways you should be judging yourself, which is
Mm-mm.
how most people go about awareness. And they just perpetuate the shame and blame cycle, because awareness is about extracting how you feel, the narratives and the lessons that are tied to your experiences that allow you to see you more clearly. That's all awareness is. It's
Yeah.
perspective seeking. It's saying, I am aware that shame and anger have impacted me. They've shown up in my business. They've shown up in my family. They've shown up with my relationships. And I'm aware that there's been damage created as a result of them. But here's the other thing. The trash from your past is not your fault. 99% of the time, it's generationally inherited. So what does that
Mm-hmm.
mean? It is your responsibility once you become aware of it, or you start burying others in your trash.
100%. Now,
Next,
you
we have to
also,
shift to ownership.
okay. Okay. So
Go
we'll
ahead.
get into ownership in a
Go ahead.
second here. You said something around awareness that I think is so key, and it's the judging. Because if you judge that awareness, you will not want to be aware anymore. And so I tell people all the time, awareness, you've got to look at it as a gift, right? It is a blessing. It's a
Yeah.
gift that you now have this awareness, and you have an opportunity to do something with that awareness. But so key that we don't judge it, because if you're going to constantly judge it, then eventually your brain is just going to go, I don't want to know. Ignorance is bliss. I don't want the awareness. I don't want to see any of it, which therefore cuts off your opportunity, right? To even do anything, recognize your trash and do something with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're
It's
moving us
required, but it's
on
also all
now.
the judgment and criticism that causes so many people to protect themselves in the first place, right? So it is a
Sure.
hard cycle to break unless you are very intentional in understanding the pathway through it, because that's what happens for most people. Oh, wow, I'm angry. Cool. I guess I just broke everything in my life. I guess I'm ruining everything. And right. And it can either become victim or shift it to a place where there's shame and blame on the
Mm-hmm.
other participants when it's maybe not even anything to do with them.
So give
And that's
us,
why I think ownership is really important. Go ahead. Sorry, Angie.
I was going to say, give us one tip then. Like when people tend to, because a lot of people do tend to judge that awareness, do you have something that can help them when they recognize that judgment? And that's the negative thoughts and the beliefs around what they're being aware of. What's a good
Yeah.
shift for them?
Yeah. So I would tell you that if you start noticing that you're getting judgmental on yourself, ask yourself one question, which is, what am I
Mm-hmm.
protecting right now? The
What
second
am
you
I
start judging
protecting right
yourself,
now?
it's armor and protection. And so ask yourself, what am I protecting right now? Because if you can at least be honest with yourself in that moment, realizing that that's an internal dialogue, you don't have to verbalize that externally, but what you might be protecting is nothing to do with what's right in front of you.
Mm,
And so
love it.
that's important. The other quick tangible thing is be very cognizant of the use of the word should. I should have gotten up earlier. I should have worked
Yes.
out more. I should have made more calls. Should is a shame-based word, and it implies that whoever you are or
Mm-hmm.
whatever you're doing, you're not good enough. So instead, replace it with could or would, and
Right.
start actually saying, what could I do differently next time? What would I have done differently if I had different variables and understanding before entering into that situation?
Yeah, I
Right?
love
And then
that.
I
It
also
puts
want,
us,
last thing that I want you to understand is with awareness, I want you to stop asking why questions.
Mm-hmm.
Ask why questions only long
Defensive.
enough until you get sort of close to the area, and then start asking what questions. What
Mm,
lessons can I extract from the situation that I can become intentional with moving forward? What can I improve or understand about how I'm showing up that might make myself more available to be received by others? What, right? Like, ask what questions, because they're objective and future focused. Why questions are a perpetual cycle of shame and blame if you're not careful.
yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that up. As coaches, we know that, and it's interesting when I work with leaders, and I'm sure you're in the same space of they want to ask people that work with them. They want to ask family members, like, "Well, why? Why?" It's
Mm-hmm.
the easiest natural word that comes up when you want an answer to something, but just to kind of clue everybody in on that, like you said, it's shame. It's really puts
Mm-hmm.
up people's defenses on like you should have done something and why didn't you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what it is. And I think once you become aware, again, I think going down the path, what I want to be clear on is these 5 pillars are not linear. They're more like a infinity that ever circling back through as you see different levels of awareness, ownership, and each
Mm-hmm.
piece as you move through yourself. But ownership is actively accepting your part or responsibility for the issues in your life, your business, your relationships, and your health. Again, blame and shame is off of the table here because this is just about perspective seeking, right?
Okay.
So again, in this situation, ownership means a couple things. One, I can own the fact that in those moments of reaction, like I gave with my wife, that I'm creating damage and perpetuating a problem that exists there. I can
Mm-hmm.
accept that the trash from my past not be my fault, but because I'm dumping it on other people, I can at least take ownership for the fact that it's still there and it's my responsibility to understand how to move through those moments differently, right? Ownership
Absolutely.
also means repair, because
Mm-hmm.
typically you're owning something that you've created damage to. So repair in relationships and businesses becomes even more important, because when there's damage, there's a lack of trust, there's armor and protection, and
Mm-hmm.
you are already immediately start disconnecting. So part of what I did when we started to unpack the anger that existed in my world was I went and I sat down with my wife's parents.
Mm.
And her dad so beautifully reinforced a point that we've been telling our kids for years, and I believe, which is that the world will never judge you based on your intent. They will always judge you based on your actions.
Mm-hmm.
I got done taking ownership and telling him how I'd shown up, how it wasn't fair. Their daughter deserved better. Their grandkids deserved better. That the disconnection in our relationship was really because of the armor and protection and where I was insecure. And her dad
Mm-hmm.
said, "Great, it all sounds good. You talk too much. Show me."
Yeah. I
It's
love
the
that. And
truth,
put
right?
that out there
And
again.
ownership,
The world
yeah.
will never judge you by your intentions, but only by your
The world
actions.
will never judge you based on your intentions, but they will always judge you based on your actions, which how often are every one of us like, that's not what I intended, but we got a
Mm-hmm.
negative
Mm-hmm.
reaction and negative feedback. Like in so many places that we had pure good intent, but
Right, right.
either our actions or the person who's receiving its armor distorts the real intent.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we start believing that we're wrong and our intent is wrong and we're a bad person. And like, it literally just hits all these elements of it. And that's why it's always really important to say, like, I'm not a big believer of like good and bad. I'm a big believer in Ryan Holiday's belief on there is no good or bad without us. There's the event that happens in the story we tell ourselves about it.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
in reality, what we have to start to recognize is if there's no good or bad, there are additive actions and activities, and there are ones that distract or take away.
Mm-hmm.
They drain, right?
Yep.
And so if we understand that the world judges us based on our actions, what actions are you taking that put you into the connected high frequency place that you want to exist versus the low resistance energy around resentment, shame, guilt, scarcity, and all those low frequency terms. So ownership's important because until you can own it, nothing else will happen.
Agreed.
Until
Now,
you step into
ownership,
it and are willing to stand in your truth, accept it, and have the courage to seek further, you won't start to move.
100% agree. Ownership is not easy for people, though. We see people fall into that victim mentality all the time. So, help people out. When it comes to ownership, what gets in the way for people?
It's the same thing that gets in the way for people with awareness. It's the armor and protection for fear of judgment and lack of connection. That's the funny thing about this, is that it's a perpetual cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
The things that we're most afraid of in each one of these categories are actually the things that free us.
Mm.
And so for me, I think it's interesting because that's like what the world has conditioned us to believe, is that things exist in the black and the white, but the gift is in the gray area,
Right.
always. And so when it comes to this, right, I really do think that to escape the shame and blame, you have to be able to recognize that, again, your actions are not defined as good or bad. It's either I'm further in alignment with the feelings that I want or I'm not. And so what I say to people all the time is yeah, people struggle with this. But until you actually have that desire to say, look, I am tired of feeling like garbage, and I'm willing to go through the process of feeling like garbage for a short period of time to alleviate what's on the other end of that, which is guaranteeing I will forever, that supports our other philosophy on understanding how to embrace pain to avoid suffering. But again, we're trying to protect from the very thing that we are putting armor up in the first place on: shame, judgment, criticism, fear of not being seen and understood, fear of not being connected, fear of being isolated. And so if you can recognize, again, that it's your armor that is disconnecting you from what you want, then in a position of awareness and ownership, you've got to fabricate the ability to say, okay, this is perspective seeking right now. Shame and blame are off the table. This isn't about what's right or wrong. This isn't about what I did or didn't do. This is about seeking the truth of the situation that caused me or the others to feel the way that they did.
And without that ownership,
and then being able to stand in the
step.
fact that other perspectives exist. Exactly. Yeah. It's
gotta
required.
have the ownership.
So you have to. It's the only way. And unfortunately, it's like the unavoidable precursor to change is acceptance. So until you can own and accept, you will never change. That's just the truth.
So we've accepted, we've taken ownership, and then you're moving into unpack.
Next is unpack. Now, this is the part that most people want to avoid because this is feeling for the purpose of healing. Okay? This is allowing yourself to actually feel the trash from your past and understand physiologically how it shows up in your body. This becomes really, really, really important because until you understand how it shows up in your body, you can't start to escape it because you won't be able to identify the patterns. Right?
Got it.
So the point here is only to sit in it long enough until it points you towards what's important. Now, some of this is longer healing that's required to unpack the patterns, the relationships, the boundaries, and things that need to exist. But sometimes this is truly just giving ourselves the ability to identify how things show up in our body so that we can see the patterns, how they show up real time. What do I mean by that? I told you how shame and anger caused me to react, get defensive, and elevate, right? That's one way that it physiologically moved through my body. My heart rate elevated. I felt my chest puff. I literally felt the heat wave over my body, and I felt the anger welling up in my throat. Physiological symptoms. When I ask you typically, how did it feel in that moment in your body? Most people say, well, it felt heavy or it felt like anxiety.
Right.
Don't label it with a literal physical feeling to an external stimulus or an emotion. Don't label right now. Just pay attention to what's happening in your body. So that happened in my body for shame and anger. But I also ran a very successful risk management employee benefits consulting business, and we consulted businesses that were over $1 billion with multiple buyers. I'd orchestrate a sale. I'd get all the buyers in the room. We'd have our team there. We will have already won the deal. And then we get in there to introduce the team to start to take over for the procurement and the execution. And I talk fast and I'm really loud if you guys haven't noticed yet, right? The reality of it is you know how many times people would be like, shh, Brian, you can't talk so fast. You can't talk so loud. And what would happen to me then? I'd shrink down. I would bite my tongue. I'd feel my jaw lock up. Shame was the same emotion. It showed up in my body 2 different ways. Shame is the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing because it shows up as fear, guilt, shame, scarcity, perfectionism, control, like so many other things that show up that we label these as emotions instead of understanding the patterns of how our bodies respond and react in moments. So same emotion, 2 different ways that move through my body. So why is this important? Because until I understand physiologically what's happening in my body, I can't start to be able to do the things that'll be required in a minute. I'll come full circle to what that looks like. But unpacking is understanding, where did the anger come from? Where did the shame come from? What were the patterns and belief systems, both intellectually and emotionally, that were created in those moments that made me feel badly or not seen or not connected, right? And continuing down that path. So it's important. This is the healing phase. This is the one that we start to really understand and get in our bodies. And it's really important here. But I always say,
it's a big step for people because, like you said, people don't want to necessarily feel the effects of the feelings that are coming up. And I mean, I used to operate that way a long time ago. I thought feelings were 100% useless and they just got in the way of what I wanted. And I never let them surface. And it took me a long time to realize that feelings actually have a really big purpose, whether they're good
Yeah.
feelings or whether, you want to frame them as negative, such as like shame, such as anger, envy, even those type of feelings, they serve a purpose for us. And it was only until I could
They
really
do.
go, there is a purpose behind these feelings. And without these feelings, I'm actually selling myself short here. I'm actually capping my potential by not feeling these things. Could I really bring them into a space and go, all right, they're not just for me to feel and have emotion. They actually make, you have progress and move the needle for you.
Yeah, they're essential because
Yeah.
pain points us towards what's important. It does
Mm-hmm.
if we're paying attention, right? Just like perspective, it points us towards what's important if we're paying attention. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I look at it and say, truly like what I had said earlier, it's like if you want to feel like garbage perpetually for the rest of your life in those low frequency energy modes, then continue to avoid it. Continue to push through and
Mm-hmm.
push down just like the world told you, right? Like, I'm not going to tell you that's right or wrong. That's your choice for your quality of
Right.
life. I know that I got to a place where the resistance and interference that was existing within me was creating external chaos beyond
Mm-hmm.
measure in a way that I almost lost the three people I care most about because of
Mm-hmm.
me. But had I not had the ability to move through those places, I would be standing here today existing in my definition of suffering, which would be a life without the three of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to recognize that it was those pieces and I did needed to move through, because here's the reality. I would get triggered in the past and it could last for days, weeks, months, years in some cases, in moments where like I felt something hard and I carried it with me, all of it, heaviness, the weight, I couldn't breathe, right? And the longer I carried it, again, the heavier it got. But here's the reality. You will never escape the negative spectrum of emotions. To your point, Angie, they serve an exact purpose always,
Yeah.
if we're listening and paying attention to our body. But the goal is to live in that negative energy less and less and less and less.
Sure.
I literally used to be in it for months and years. Today, I live in it in minutes and moments. And
Yes.
so it's about the freedom you want to create in your life. And if you want to deny it, you'll continue to repeat the same patterns.
And that's important there, Brian, too, I think, because the way you just said it about like the triggers, I think sometimes people associate triggers and living in that space as almost like a heated, elevated anger. And I know that's what you're kind of referring to it as, but it doesn't always show up that way. Sometimes
It
it's the
doesn't.
trigger of depression or sadness or
Yes.
lack of value,
Yes.
like all these different things. And it's important for people to realize that when you are triggered in any kind of emotion and it leaves you in this space of, not taking action, of kind of wallowing in self-pity, whatever it may be, I think that's what you're talking about, being stuck in that space of whatever emotion it may be. And the goal here is to have you recognize it and feel it, but navigate out of it, in a faster way time and time again as you progress.
Yeah. That's the whole goal.
Okay.
The fourth one is flip the lid. And this isn't like flip the lid, react and get angry like we're used to hearing. This is literally flip open your lid and see what's risen to the top. So what does this mean? It means lay out your trash in the light. What emotions, thoughts are running through you right now? List them out right now with any attempt to rationalize. And this is about separating the fight or flight and really putting yourself in the moment so that you can respond. So let me understand what this looks like, okay? Flipping the lid for me is done in two ways. It's done in moments of trigger, and it's done as a reflective path at the end of the day to scan your can and release what no longer serves you. We get trash brought into our worlds every single day. And just like we take out the trash in our homes every day, it requires us to do the same inside, or we just continue to carry more and more and more.
Yeah.
And so the reality of it is this is really important. Every day I flip the lid at the end of the day to scan my can and see the moments in my day that I had a lower frequency energy. I was in a spectrum of emotion that I didn't want to be in, and try to unpack and understand it real time to know, again, where my awareness, ownership, what I need to unpack exists in those places, because I continue to shorten the curve. Flip the lid also happens in moments though, right? So what is this? Well, now my wife can say something to me, and if I feel a negative reaction or protection, I can be aware and own it in the moment and say something to the effect of, hey, babe, I don't think I heard you correctly because I felt a trigger or reaction. Could you try to restate it and I'll try to hear it through a more clear lens? Or maybe if I can't diffuse my energy, we can revisit it later. Right. Being able to
Beautiful.
flip your lid in the
Pause and
moment
response.
allows you to move in that moment to make sure that damage isn't ever created. Because again, then there's no shame and blame, because guess what? You're going to feel these trigger emotions for months and years potentially beyond when you start to heal through them. They're adversaries in constant pursuit that will literally be chasing you for the rest of your life. You have to be vigilant in your effort to be in the present moment and be able to do this as real time as possible. Because again, when you can move from a reaction to a response, you don't create damage, which also means you don't have to have the additional energy drain to create repair on the other side.
Absolutely. And I say to people all the time, I think that's important, is that, when you give yourself that time to pause, you're able to, kind of let those emotions go and show up and have a different response. And that's so huge. And, people expect to do this work and for those triggers to never come up anymore. And they're like, well, it's still coming up. And I'm like,
every day.
Okay, they're going to come up. It's how you respond to them that shows your growth.
Yeah.
It's not that they never come up. It's that you caught it and we're like, I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to pause and I'm going to respond. That's your win.
Yeah.
That's your growth we're looking for. Not that it never comes again.
Well, and my wife and I would be like snarling at each other for weeks on end and trying to pretend like everything was okay and do that fake armored hug and love and try to like love on each other. But the reality of it is we were miserable in the same freaking house in so many ways because we were so armored, so disconnected, and we could put blame on the other person. But the reality of it is the solution was actually within both of us. And that's what's going to be really important, because when you can flip the lid in the moment, this is the really truth, is that you let it right there. The pause is important, because that's literally what we say. The second you feel that negative frequency emotion, I want you to pause and take a breath.
Pause.
And I want you to ask yourself two questions. Is what I'm reacting to right now due to what's right in front of me, or the trash from my past? 99% of the time, it's going to be the trash from your past. Okay. Then the second question I want you to ask yourself is, what am I protecting right now? Because if you can center yourself in this moment, in those two truths, you'll realize that you can actually take a breath and release the freaking armor that you just put up for no reason.
Yeah.
More times than not, there's no reason to protect, but we are conditioned to believe we need to.
Yeah, that's your win. That is the win, and that is the growth that inspires you to keep doing the same thing again and again and letting that armor down. So love that. Your last pillar, what is it?
The last pillar is move. This is, how does it move through your body? How does it move through your world? And how do you move through it? Okay. This is, how do these emotions and reactions like literally show up in your world? What triggers you? Understanding both how it moves through your body and moves through your world is where you create freedom. Okay, so I gave you two examples of how shame and anger move through my body. Shame moves through my body 5 or 6 different ways that I'm aware of. And anger moves through my body 5 or 6 different ways that I'm aware of. It's important to understand the physiological patterns that exist in those moments, because otherwise I will identify it as something else. I need to understand how it shows up in my body, conditioned in different situations, so that I can see myself more clearly and be able to have awareness and ownership. Now, when I start to be able to do that, now I have clarity on the 5 or 6 different ways that it shows up on both of those emotions. I have over 50 shame triggers that I'm aware of and over 60 anger triggers that I'm aware of.
Wow.
Right? What are the triggers? Those moments that cause your body to feel like you're in fight or flight and your nervous system is tapped, whether it's real or not. Great example. My wife has 2 little chihuahuas. Well, we do. They're our dogs as well, but I say my wife because she wants a little farm of chihuahuas someday. And I'm
like, are you not claiming
those, Brian? Do it, because when the doorbell rings, the yappers send my nervous system through the roof, right? I immediately get on edge because of the sensory overload that I'm in. Now, if I didn't understand that that was an anger response for me, and I didn't understand that this was one of the triggers, then what could happen is what did used to happen was that would take place, and I'd be sitting on the couch, and my son that has autism or my daughter who's hearing impaired would come over and jump in my lap right after that, and I'd react because the energy was so tightly wound, but it had nothing to do with my kids, had nothing to do with even where I was at in the moment. It had everything to do with the dogs barking, which was just a sensory input.
Huge.
But until you understand the patterns of how these things show up in your world, you will perpetually be stuck. You won't be able to move. And these are the things that don't get taught regularly, right? It's like, oh, discover the moments that you're feeling fear and unpack that. Well, cool. How does fear show up in your body? It shows up differently for everybody. There's similar patterns, but it doesn't mean that your markers are exactly the same as they describe fear.
Right.
So again, don't go by the norms and the suggestions of the external. Understand you and how your emotional, intellectual, and physiological reactions and responses and moments take you further away from who you really are and who you want to become.
Yeah. Define it for yourself. Know yourself. Absolutely. So you've given us five pillars here, and that is taking out the trash. You do that, Brian. I mean, you do this with clients. You're a coach, you're a speaker, and you lead people through this all the time. You've done it for yourself, I think, several times, which I think is beautiful. This is not a one-time thing. It's like as you grow and you develop and you come in different relationships, you realize sometimes there's more trash to take out. So, with this, what does it leave you with? When somebody takes out the trash, what then? What does life look like?
So let me give you a really real, tangible example that will land, because there's a lot of abstract answers I could give you that will sound great, but I want this to land hard for people.
Okay.
Here's my truth. I've lived with physical pain in my body every day for almost 31 years. 31 years.
It's a lot.
At about 20, I started to realize the increase in my physical pain because the decompression of my spine and my body and the imbalance. And I started putting external measures to treat the physical body around what I thought was still needing to be healed, to move, to stretch, to align, to all these pieces, okay? I was blind to the emotional pain that I had and the spiritual pain that I had for so many years. So this was my pattern and path. The last 7 have been a different path, because that's when I've been tapping into the emotional side and really doing the deepest level of healing. Okay. I will tell you, just give you some examples. 2020, we left the 15-year path of building the business that did provide so much for our life, but also caused a whole lot. We made a massive shift, and it took me almost 18 months to unpack the patterns that existed from that world. Right? I told you before we jumped on that it was less than a year later that my wife sat on the patio and told me that I caused her to lose who she was. And that's when we started to unpack anger. And it was after I left to go do all these things. The last 2.5 years have been some of the most difficult times in my life, emotionally, mentally, financially, spiritually. In every way, I was tapped as I was going through this, and it felt like things were not going to progress. I've been at a 7 or 8 out of 10 on a scale of physical pain daily for the last 2.5 to 3 years. 2-hour morning routine minimum to get myself moving.
Wow.
I've done the deepest amount of work and did some of the really deepest healing that I've ever done in the last 9 months. Made some other different changes and done things. Today marks 42 days with 0 physical pain.
Wow. 0.
A lot of what I was still carrying from a physical side, because of the imbalance, there is a physical element. But it was truly the emotional pain that I was still carrying that was showing up, causing my nervous system to be tapped, causing my muscles to be so tight, causing everything to be shocked and moving through my body. Now, again, I'm not saying it's 100% emotional. It's not. I do a lot to work on my body. But the reality of it is what it means on the other side is, I describe it this way. And it's the best way I've been able to describe it in the last 40 days. Because I had this conditioned belief that I would always exist with pain and that pain was necessary for anything worthwhile. And now I'm having to shatter that belief system real time. But here's what it's felt like. It's felt like I've literally been barely treading water, because I've had chains with giant cement blocks that have been pulling me down, and I'm strong. So I have held up that weight and I've kept myself breathing. I've been able to perform and I've done what I needed to do, but that weight I always felt. The last few months have been like this, but the removal of physical pain has amplified it to a level that I can't even describe, because I feel like the chains have been cut and there's 0 effort. I'm just floating in the flow of life right now. The level of things that are coming into our world, the magnetism that's being created, the things that are happening. And honestly, my wife and I are deep partners in everything in our family, everything in our life. She's my business partner. We have repaired at a level that is unbelievable. I have this most intimate relationship that's ever existed in my life right now in front of me. My kids exist in a place that they feel emotionally safe with me and actually talk to me about stuff at 7 and 9 that most 7 and 9-year-olds can't comprehend. But it's because 2 years ago, their dad, they didn't know if he was going to react in any given moment. And now they know and trust based on the pattern and what we've done to set boundaries for them. So what's on the other side? Joy, freedom, and fulfillment. I felt disconnected, dark, alone, isolated, unworthy, fatigued, frustrated, resentful for so many years, despite having insane levels of success in my life that many people admired. Internally, I was a wreck. Now my internal and external life are in deep congruence. And I don't think it's a coincidence that I don't have physical pain.
Mm-mm. No, not at all. And I mean, it's fascinating that because you had the physical pain, you can also see the difference there. And I think people have to remember that, it's not necessarily about physical pain. You don't have to be in physical pain to have this change and this growth in your life. But how amazing that you got to experience from that perspective to say, wow, you can tell everything else is better, but physically that's just amazing. And a sign to, yeah, how much the emotional side of it affects our whole entire body. So I love what you
Yeah.
do. I love the pillars that you've brought to everyone today. And I want to encourage everyone to kind of think about some of those questions you asked. That very first one when you said, who's the last person that made you feel like crap, or made you feel like trash? And starting there and what emotion comes up there. So much beautiful work to be done in there. I always like to know, you gave us so much wisdom already, but I always like to ask my guests, sharing wisdom is also about wisdom that you've had from other people. So when you think about your lifetime, what's a piece of wisdom that somebody has given you that you've really kind of tucked away and always held on to and put into your life?
Yeah. I'm actually, what's funny is when you started talking, I had two directions that I thought I was going to go. And by the time you were done talking, I got chills and my heart beat, and it told me immediately that those were not the path. So I was buying myself some
Feeling it
time to
move.
pull that back. But
Yeah.
truly, why it hit my heart is, it's a lesson that my dad taught me. And it's not a
Mm.
complicated one, but it is so real and so wise.
Mm.
Because he said that no matter what, never fails, every single situation in life, guaranteed, always, you will have a minimum of two choices. Now, they both might be shitty choices, right? You
Mm-hmm.
could be held up at gunpoint and it's a choice between getting shot or handing over all your expensive things and having to go through the work of doing all that stuff, but that's still your choice.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality of it is that when we can start to remove the shame and blame and live in a place of objectivity and non-judgment with ourselves, it also is really empowering to recognize that every part of your life has been here because of one of two choices you've made in a variety of situations at a minimum. But give
Mm-hmm.
yourself the grace to also recognize that every decision you've made, every choice you've made was due to where you were in your life, the lessons that existed, and the variables that you had access to in front of you. Which means you made the best decision possible you could in that time. And if you can allow yourself to view everything in life through that lens, then you also have the choice to continue to decide to flip open your lid, scan your can, and do the work so that you can actually heal and have the freedom, power, and potential in your life that you deserve and you can create.
Who wouldn't want to go there? I know there's a lot of people listening and going, God, that sounds really good. I want that freedom. I want that joy. I want that peace that you describe. So go follow Brian Bogert. Gosh, he's on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, speaker, coach, business strategist. Any particular way you want to give people direction on where they can find you over one place or another,
No,
Brian?
you did it great. I'm at Bogert Brian on all social, and we're brianbogert.com from the web. What I would tell you is
There you
that
go.
we are on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible by reducing the level of internal suffering that exists on this planet. One of the areas I wasn't congruent is I only had high ticket offers for a long time, and that never felt right to me. So we have two things that we created in the last year that are zero or very low barrier of entry from a financial reason for you to get access to a deep level of actual work that you can access. And so I will just throw that out there because we have our
Yeah.
Take Out Your Trash Challenge and an app that we built that we do every month. And it's unbelievable what it gets people moving through. And then we've got a community as well that exists down below to really make sure that we can do hot seat coaching and have transference and transformation in a group capacity for those that can't afford the one-to-one work. So
Love
all
it.
that said, I just want to say, consume content. We put a lot of free stuff out there. If there's anything we can do to help you, please. I don't want anything from you. I want everything for you. And that's just how we operate.
Yeah, I love it. It's so important. I mean, coaching has this stigmatism that, it's expensive and it's not for everybody. And so I love that you're putting something out there that everybody can tap into and that you're providing those resources. So thank you so much, Brian, for joining me today. Thanks for sharing your wisdom on taking out the trash.